If you're listening to this, it means I've already broken the rule. You know the one, the only one that actually matters here. The rule no one survives. I don't know how long I have before they notice, before the cameras flicker and the static hisses and everything I just did gets erased. But I need you to hear me first. I need you to know that what happened to me wasn't an accident. You see, I wasn't the first, not by a long shot. They don't tell you that when you walk in. The job ad looks like any other. Part-time night security, no experience required, easy pay. The kind of thing you scroll past without thinking unless you're desperate enough to consider it. And I was desperate. Rent doesn't wait, and hunger has a way of pushing your standards lower than you'd like to admit. That's how they get you. That's how they've always gotten us. But I should have known better. God, I should have known the second I read that ad. Too good to be true, but my mind twisted it into something harmless. It's just a warehouse, I told myself. Just cameras and hallways. Nothing I can't handle. That was before I learned why no one lasts more than a week. Before I saw what the cameras really show. Before I heard what was waiting on the other side of those doors we weren't supposed to open. Others tried. I've seen the evidence. Scrawled notes stuffed into lockers, broken ID cards left behind like teeth on the floor. I thought those were exaggerations, pranks left to scare the new guy. But no, they were warnings. Warnings that I ignored, the same way you're ignoring that prickling feeling crawling up your neck right now. Because you're curious, aren't you? You want to know what makes this job impossible, why I'm whispering like someone's right behind me. You want the truth that everyone else died before they could finish telling. So here it is. I lasted longer than most. I learned more than I was supposed to. And what I uncovered down there, what's humming beneath this place, can't be unseen. If you're smart, you'll stop now. Close this video, forget you ever clicked it. Because once you know, you can't unknow. And once you hear their names, their rules, their voices in the static, they'll know you too. Still here? Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you. I'll tell you everything. I'll start from the beginning. I should have known the second I saw the listing.
It started with a scrolling thumb and an empty stomach. That's the honest truth. I wasn't looking for anything glamorous, just something that would stop the late fees from stacking on my rent notice like silent threats. Every night, after microwaving whatever cheap meal I could scrape together, I'd sit with the glow of my cracked phone screen and swipe through job boards. Dishwasher, rideshare, call centers, all paying just enough to keep you alive, but never enough to live. Then I saw it. The ad was buried halfway down the page, almost like it had been waiting for me. Bold letters, no fluff. Night security guard needed. Easy work, high pay. I laughed out loud when I read it. It felt like the kind of too good to be true bait your sketchy uncle clicks on at 2 a.m. But the number below the posting wiped the grin off my face. More than double minimum wage for sitting in a chair, watching cameras. No degree, no certification, no years of soul-sucking experience required. Just eyes open, that's all. Now, if you're sane, you hear that and think, scam. At best, it's some pyramid scheme. At worst, you're waking up in a bathtub full of ice missing a kidney. But hunger doesn't let you be sane. Hunger says, what if it's real? Hunger says, you can cover rent and maybe buy real groceries for once. I told myself it couldn't be that bad. Maybe the building was in a rough neighborhood. Maybe they'd had problems with vandals or squatters. Places exaggerate to lure people in. I told myself all of that as I clicked apply now with a thumb that shook from caffeine and nerves. When they called me back the next morning, I should have been suspicious. Real jobs never move that fast. Real jobs bury you under forms and references and endless silence. But the man on the phone, voice too cheerful, too practiced, just said, "Can you start Monday night?" That should have been the red flag. But instead of running, I grinned like an idiot. My brain twisted it into good fortune. Look at me, finally catching a break. Of course, I didn't catch a break. I caught the hook. The whole weekend, I hyped myself up. It was almost funny the way I treated it like some big step forward. I imagined myself in a crisp uniform, sipping coffee from a thermos, maybe even feeling professional. It wasn't glamorous, but it was respectable. Security had a nice ring to it, better than chronically unemployed. Still, that ad wouldn't leave my head. The wording was too neat, too blunt. Easy work, high pay. No talk of responsibilities, no mention of training, and the strangest part, no company name. Just an address, just coordinates on a map that, when I plugged them into my phone, pointed to a place I didn't even recognize. That should have been the second red flag. A job without a name isn't a job. It's bait. But I kept telling myself the same excuse. If it was dangerous, they wouldn't post it online. I ignored the unease, laughed it off, told myself, what's the worst that could happen? I get paid to nap in front of some old cameras. I'd find out soon enough why the pay was generous. Generous enough to cover silence. Generous enough to keep people from asking questions. I should have known better, but I showed up anyway, just before midnight on Monday, standing in front of a facility I'd never seen before, wondering why the front doors looked like they were trying to keep something in rather than out.
The man who greeted me didn't look like any boss I'd ever met. He wasn't in a suit, not even in the sort of half-tucked polo you'd expect from a night manager. He wore a cardigan, an old beige thing with pilling on the sleeves, and a smile that stretched too far across his face. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind you practice in the mirror, just a little too symmetrical, like he'd learned it from a book. "Welcome," he said, his voice syrupy and rehearsed. "We don't get many applicants who actually show up. I'm glad you did." That should have been my cue to leave. Why emphasize that people didn't show up? But I just laughed awkwardly and followed him inside. The place was strange. Half sterile office, half industrial warehouse. The front lobby was lit by buzzing fluorescent lights that hummed louder than the air conditioning. No posters, no branding, nothing on the walls except a clock that seemed to tick off beat. He led me past it all, hands clasped behind his back like some cheerful professor giving a tour. "Your duties are simple," he said. "You watch the monitors, you record anything unusual, you don't intervene." "Unusual how?" I asked. He smiled wider. "You'll know it when you see it." We stopped in front of the security office, a cramped room lined with glowing screens, each one showing a different corridor, storage space, or stairwell. But some of them were black, cameras offline apparently. I pointed at one. "Those don't work?" he said quickly, too quickly. "Not your concern. You won't need them." And then came the rules. He didn't hand me a handbook or make me sign anything. He just stood in the doorway and recited them like commandments. "Rule 1, he began, tilting his head slightly. "You do not, under any circumstances, enter the west hallway. The camera feed will stay off. Let it stay off." I frowned. "What's down there?" His eyes flicked to mine, still smiling, but the warmth drained from it. "Not your concern." "Rule 2, if you see the janitors, do not engage them. They're not here for you." I couldn't help it. I laughed. "The janitors?" He didn't. "Don't speak to them. Don't answer if they speak to you. If they try to hand you something, don't take it." By then I was half convinced this was some elaborate hazing ritual for new hires, but he wasn't finished. "Rule 3, if you hear knocking from inside the building, you don't answer. Doesn't matter where it comes from, walls, doors, vents, you do not answer." He leaned closer then, lowering his voice as if the walls themselves might overhear. "They'll make it sound convincing, but it's not them. Do you understand?" I nodded, though I didn't. "Rule 4, never open the basement door, not for anyone, not even me." That one made me shiver. The way he said it. Flat, final, no room for negotiation. I tried to play it off with humor. "So what happens if I break a rule? I get fired?" He tilted his head again, smile fixed. you don't last the week. The room felt colder after he said it. He clapped his hands then like he'd just finished explaining a board game. That's it. Simple enough, yes? Do your shift, follow the rules, and you'll walk away with more money than you've ever made in 1 week of your life. Tempting, isn't it? Tempting wasn't the word. The pay was good, sure, but listening to him rattle off those warnings made my stomach twist. Still, I wasn't about to back out now. Rent was waiting. Desperation can make you nod even when your gut screams no. He handed me a set of keys and gestured toward the chair in front of the monitors. "Good luck," he said. "I'll see you at the end of the week." And just like that, he left. The door closed behind him with a click that sounded too final. I sat there, alone with the glow of the screens and the echo of his rules in my head. It was ridiculous, wasn't it? Paranormal janitors, phantom knocking, forbidden hallways. It all sounded like something from a bad horror story. I leaned back in the chair, shaking my head, and whispered to myself, "It's just paranoia, right?"
The first night was boring. That was the most unsettling thing about it. How crushingly, mind-numbingly boring it all felt. I sat there in the glow of 20 different screens, each one showing a different slice of the building. Hallways, stairwells, storage rooms. They were all perfectly empty. Nothing moved, except the flicker of fluorescent lights and the occasional moth that smacked itself against the lens. I tried to keep myself entertained. There was a vending machine down the hall, stocked with stale chips and candy bars that tasted like they'd been there since the 90s. Dinner became a bag of pretzels and a Coke that had lost its fizz months ago. I propped my feet up on the desk, leaned back in the chair, and thought, this is it? I get paid for this? For a little while, I convinced myself it wasn't so bad. Just me, the hum of the monitors, and the occasional squeak of the HVAC system. I even texted a friend half-jokingly, "Easiest money of my life. I'm basically babysitting empty hallways." But as the hours dragged on, I started to notice things. Tiny things at first. A camera feed would flicker for half a second, static rolling across the screen before snapping back to normal. A clock on the wall would tick too fast, then correct itself. Once I swore I heard footsteps echoing down a corridor. Loud, distinct, like heavy work boots. I leaned forward, scanning the screens, but every hallway was still. Empty. By the second night, the silence felt heavier. The kind of silence that makes you notice your own breathing, your own heartbeat, and start questioning if maybe the building itself is holding its breath with you. I stared at the cameras so long my eyes burned, daring something, anything to happen, just to break the monotony. That's when I noticed the coworkers. Not in person, God forbid no one ever came to sit with me, but on the monitors. A janitor pushing a cart across the east wing at 2 a.m. A man in a faded uniform walking down the main hall with his head bowed low. At first I thought nothing of it, just normal night staff doing their rounds. But then I blinked, and they were gone. No fade, no transition, no walking out of frame. 1 second there, the next second not. Like the feed had skipped forward a few frames and erased them in the process. I sat forward in my chair, replaying the feed, but there was nothing to replay. The system didn't allow rewinding, live feed only. I tried to tell myself it was fatigue, a trick of tired eyes. I'd been awake too long, I needed coffee, or maybe to get up and stretch. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen. People disappearing without moving an inch. By the third night, the weirdness escalated. The vending machine ate my dollar, then spat the crumpled bill back out. But when I glanced at the cameras, I swore I saw a shadow standing next to me, reflected in the corner of the frame. A tall shape, perfectly still, right beside where I stood in the hallway. But when I turned my head, there was nothing, just humming lights and my own reflection in the glass. Later that same shift, the noises started. Knocking. Soft at first, like fingertips drumming against metal pipes. I froze, remembering the manager's voice. If you hear knocking, you don't answer. It grew louder, more deliberate. 3 hard bangs from somewhere deep in the West Wing, the hallway with the blacked-out feed. I leaned closer to the monitor even though it showed nothing but static. My throat felt dry. The sound came again, closer this time, like someone pounding on the walls just a few feet from the office. I almost quit right then. My mind screamed, grab your bag, walk out the door, and never look back. The pay wasn't worth this. No paycheck was worth feeling like something unseen was stalking the hallways, testing the rules. But then, on the edge of exhaustion, fear, and defiance, I saw her. It was just after 3 a.m. My eyes had glazed over from hours of staring at the feeds when I noticed movement on one of the screens. The north corridor, the one that should have been locked. A woman was walking down the hallway. At first, she looked normal. Jeans, a dark hoodie, long hair that swung as she moved. But her face flickered. One frame, it was there. The next, it blurred into static, like the camera couldn't quite capture her. And then she did something that made my blood run cold. She stopped, turned, looked directly into the camera, and then she waved.
I sat frozen in my chair, eyes glued to the monitor like if I blinked, she'd disappear the same way the janitors had. The woman stood there in that hallway, one that was supposed to be locked, sealed, forbidden. She didn't move at first. She just stared into the lens, into me as if she knew I was watching. Her face was wrong. Not grotesque or bloody like some cheap horror movie, but wrong in a way I can't fully describe. 1 second her features were perfectly clear. Brown eyes, pale skin, lips pressed in a faint smile. The next, her face collapsed into static, the pixels breaking apart like the camera itself refused to hold her image. Then it would snap back, crisp and clear, only to flicker again a heartbeat later. I told myself it was a glitch, a technical error. Maybe the cameras were old, the wiring bad, anything but what it looked like, anything but real. And then she raised her hand. She waved at me. A small, deliberate wave, the kind you give when you know someone's watching you through a window. I actually laughed, half nerves, half disbelief. Yeah, sure, I muttered under my breath. Let's just wave back at the ghost. That'll end well. My voice sounded hollow in the room, like the monitors were swallowing the sound. I didn't wave, of course. I just sat there gripping the armrests until my fingers hurt, trying not to move, not to breathe too loud, as if she might hear me through the feed. Then she did something worse. She leaned closer to the camera. Not physically, her body stayed rooted to the hallway floor, but the image of her tilted forward, like the lens itself was pulling her in. Her lips moved. She mouthed something slowly, deliberately, syllable by syllable. I couldn't hear her, but I read the words as clear as if she whispered them into my ear. To this day, what she mouthed still haunts me. I won't repeat it. Not yet. Not here. Because once you know, you'll never look at a dark hallway the same way again. Back then, though, I didn't understand. I just sat there, heart hammering, replaying those silent words in my head, trying to decide if I'd imagined it. And then, without warning, the feed cut out. The hallway went black. No static, no flicker, just darkness. When it returned a few seconds later, she was gone. I shoved the chair back so hard it screeched against the tile. Every instinct screamed at me to grab my bag and leave. Screw the paycheck, screw the rules, just walk out before something worse happened. But I didn't. Desperation has a way of shackling you to bad decisions. Rent doesn't care if you're scared out of your mind. I sat back down, trembling, and forced myself to finish the shift. The rest of the night passed in silence, though every flicker of the monitors made me jump. By the time morning came, I was a wreck. On my way out, I saw the manager in the lobby. Cardigan neat, smile as fixed as ever. "Quiet night?" he asked, his voice so casually polite it almost made me laugh. I almost told him. I almost asked, "Who is she? Why is there someone in the locked hallway?" But something in his eyes told me not to. like he already knew exactly what I'd seen, like he was waiting for me to break one of the rules, to admit I'd noticed what I shouldn't. So I just nodded and muttered, "Yeah, quiet." But the truth followed me home, gnawing at me every second of the day. I couldn't stop replaying it, her face flickering, her hand waving, those lips forming words I couldn't ignore. By the time my fourth night rolled around, I had made my mind. If she came back, if I saw her again, I wasn't just going to sit there. I was going to test the rules.
By the fourth night, the rules didn't feel like commandments anymore. They felt like dares. Every time I glanced at the laminated list the manager had taped beside the monitors, I could almost hear it mocking me. Don't talk to the janitors. Don't answer the knocking. Don't open the basement door. It was too neat, too theatrical, like they wanted me to slip. And maybe a saner person would have obeyed, maybe a smarter one. But fear and boredom do strange things to the brain. By then, the silence had carved grooves into my skull, the monotony turning every creak and hiss into an itch I had to scratch. So when the knocking started again, I decided to break a rule. It began softly, a polite tap-tap-tap, like knuckles against wood. I froze in the chair, eyes flicking between the monitors. It wasn't coming from the speakers. It was here, in the building, closer than before. The knocks grew louder, 3 heavy bangs shaking the walls, then silence. "Yeah, okay," I muttered, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Let's see what happens if I play along." I stood, heart hammering, and stepped into the hallway. The air was colder there, sharp enough to sting my throat. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a pale, sickly glow. The knocking came again, this time from the west wing, the one with the camera feed permanently blacked out. I told myself it was a trick, maybe some kids messing around, or even another employee testing me. But every step I took toward that sound made the hair on my arms rise higher. I reached the locked door at the end of the corridor and pressed my palm against it. The knocking stopped instantly, like whoever or whatever was inside knew I'd arrived. I don't know what I expected. Maybe a voice, maybe laughter. What I got was worse. I knocked back. 3 quick taps, mimicking theirs. The silence that followed stretched too long, like the building itself was holding its breath. Then from the other side came a reply. Not knocks this time. Words, whispered so faintly I could barely catch them through the door. "We see you." I stumbled back, heart slamming into my ribs. The air thickened like smoke, though the hallway was clear. The lights above me flickered, once, twice, and then the entire building shifted. I can't explain it any better than that. One second I was standing in the west corridor, door in front of me. The next I was back in the security office staring at the monitors. The clock on the wall said 3 a.m., but when I glanced down at my phone, it read 5:30. 2 hours gone, erased. The monitors were worse. Every feed was looping, hallways repeating themselves over and over, the same shadow walking by in a perfect cycle, the same flicker of a moth crashing against glass again and again. I leaned closer, trying to make sense of it, when one of the shadows stopped mid-loop. It turned, slowly, deliberately, and it looked right at me. I shoved the chair back, breath caught in my throat. The figure didn't move again, didn't disappear like the janitors had. It just stood there, staring, until the feed jumped to static and cleared. When the image returned, the hallway was empty. I sat in that office shivering, trying to make sense of what had just happened, but the truth pressed down harder on me than the silence ever had. The rules weren't arbitrary. They weren't there to make the job sound creepy. They were survival instructions, and I had just broken one. That was the night I stopped thinking of this place as a job. That was the night I realized I wasn't supposed to see what came next.
They told me never to open the basement door. That single rule had gnawed at me since day one. the bold print on the manager's laminated sheet staring back like a dare. After what I'd seen, the vanished coworkers, the woman on camera, the hours that simply disappeared, it wasn't curiosity anymore. It was necessity. Because if there were answers anywhere, they'd be down there. The basement door was thick, painted the same dull gray as the walls, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. The lock was simple, too simple. A cheap brass padlock hanging loose, like they wanted me to think it was secure. I shouldn't have done it. But when you've already broken one rule, crossing another line doesn't feel as catastrophic. The padlock snapped open in my hand, almost eager. The hinges groaned as I pulled the door, and a stale, heavy breath of air rushed out, carrying the smell of damp concrete and something coppery, sour, wrong. I descended the narrow stairwell with only the dim glow of my flashlight, the walls closing in tighter with every step. The hum of the building above vanished until all I could hear was the steady drip of water somewhere below and my own heartbeat. The stairs ended in a long corridor lined with storage rooms. The first was filled with broken chairs, old monitors stacked in uneven towers. But the second made my blood run cold. It was a collection, a shrine of sorts, rows of metal shelves sagging under the weight of belongings, shoes, wallets, phones, and security ID badges with faces I didn't recognize. Some of the plastic cards were cracked, the names scuffed away by time, but others were clear, too clear. There must have been dozens, maybe hundreds, all past guards. I picked one up, my hand trembling. The face staring back was younger than mine, smiling awkwardly like he hated having his picture taken. His badge said, Marcus H., Night Security. I dropped it like it burned me. The next room was worse. Uniforms, stacked in uneven piles. Dark stains blotched across the fabric, stiff and flaking. Some were shredded, clawed through as if by animals. Others were intact, but so soaked in dried blood they looked rusted. I pressed a hand over my mouth to keep from gagging. That's when I noticed the tapes. On a folding table in the corner, a small black recorder sat beside a box of labeled cassettes. Each had a name written on it, names that matched the IDs I'd just seen. My hand shook as I slid one into the recorder and pressed play. A man's voice crackled through, broken by static. 3 nights in. Can't sleep when I get home. Cameras showing things that aren't there. Manager says it's fine. Not to question it, but I know what I saw. The tape cut, then resumed mid-breath. The basement smells worse every night. Feels like something is down here with me. If anyone ever finds this, don't trust the manager. Don't trust him. Static swallowed the rest. I rewound, played again, but the ending was the same. I rifled through more tapes, desperate, my fingers leaving sweaty prints on the brittle labels. Another tape hissed to life. This one was a woman's voice, shaky, whispering. They're not protecting people. Don't you get it? They're feeding it. Every week, new guard. Every week, new offering. I hear it scratching the walls at night, waiting. I slammed the stop button. The recorder's click echoed through the room too loud, too final. I wanted to run, to leave everything and never come back, but my legs wouldn't move, because in that silence, I heard something else. Not a recording, not static. Breathing. Slow, ragged breaths coming from deeper in the basement. My flashlight flickered. I swung it toward the corridor beyond the storage rooms, and for the briefest moment I thought I saw something retreating into the dark. Something too tall,
its limbs bending wrong, dragging across the wall with a screech that set my teeth on edge. I killed the light and pressed myself against the shelves, heart thundering so loud I was sure it would give me away. The breathing continued. Closer, closer, and then it stopped. Minutes passed, or maybe seconds. I don't know. Finally, I forced myself to move. I crept back toward the stairwell, trying not to look at the uniforms, the tapes, the IDs that suddenly felt like gravestones. When I finally slammed the basement door shut behind me, I stood gasping in the hallway like I had surfaced from drowning. But the relief was short-lived. Because when I returned to the office, the laminated sheet of rules was gone. And in its place, taped neatly to the wall, was a fresh sheet, the same list, except one new line added at the bottom, in the same tidy handwriting. Do not return to the basement. And that's when everything upstairs felt different. Like the walls themselves had shifted, and the building knew I'd broken its last secret.
I used to laugh at the phrase mind-numbing job. You know, those long, empty shifts where you scroll your phone, snack on junk food, and pray for morning. Now, I'd give anything for that kind of boredom again. Because after the basement, the nights stopped being quiet. They became wrong. It started with the cameras. At first, they just glitched. Static lines across the screen, frozen frames that made people blink in jerky, puppet-like motions. But then, the glitches began to linger. I'd see figures walking hallways I knew were locked, moving in loops, repeating the same 3 seconds like someone pressed rewind on reality. Sometimes they weren't strangers. Sometimes they looked like the guards from the ID badges I'd seen downstairs. I tried calling it in, just to test the waters. My walkie crackled, then erupted with whispers, not words I could understand. Wet, slurred voices, overlapping like a dozen mouths pressed against the speaker. I threw the walkie down, but the whispers didn't stop. They crawled into my head, tickling the inside of my skull until I smashed the walkie against the desk to make it end. I thought I'd slept through part of my shift once. The wall clock read 1:37 a.m. when I checked it, but when I blinked, it had reset to 10:04. I stared at the hands, my stomach dropping, because they weren't ticking forward anymore. They were twitching back and forth, like they couldn't decide what time it wanted to be. And then I saw the sunrise. At 3 a.m., a golden light poured through the office window, flooding the room in warm morning brightness. I stumbled toward it, nearly crying from relief, only to find that the sunrise wasn't outside. The glow was coming from the walls themselves, the paint blistering with heat, as if something behind them was burning its way out. I ran to another window, desperate for orientation, but the outside view had changed. Where the parking lot should have been was a vast, empty field. No cars, no streetlights, just tall, black grass swaying under a starless sky. That's when I stopped trusting windows altogether. Nights melted into each other. I stopped knowing how many shifts I'd worked. Sometimes I'd glance at the clock and realize hours had vanished. Other times I'd watch the same 10 minutes repeat 3, 4, 5 times. I wasn't sleeping. I couldn't. Even when I closed my eyes, I'd hear the building breathing, the ventilation humming too much like a living lung. And always, on the edge of every camera feed, she was there. The woman from the restricted hallway, the one who waved. She never got closer, never moved toward the lens, but she was always watching, always waiting, her face flickering in and out like a corrupted file. I told myself I could last the week. That's what I'd promised. 7 days, paycheck in hand, and I'd be gone. But then it hit me. I didn't even know what day it was anymore. The clocks lied, the sky lied.
My body felt like it had lived a month in 3 nights, and that's when the truth set in like a knife sliding between ribs. Time doesn't work here. I thought the test was surviving 7 nights, but how can you count nights in a place where the night never ends?
I knew it was the last night the moment I walked in. The building didn't try to hide it anymore. The air tasted metallic, sharp on my tongue. The walls seemed to pulse with a heartbeat I couldn't sync to my own. Even the security monitors were blank, every feed replaced with a dark, endless tunnel. And waiting in my chair was the manager. He'd never been there during my shift before, always too polite, too distant, leaving his warnings like little riddles for me to trip over. But now he sat comfortably, legs crossed, a smile carved across his face like it had been painted on. "You've lasted longer than most," he said, as if congratulating me on an achievement. His voice was smooth, too smooth, like water running over polished stone. 7 nights, or at least enough to call it that. You've seen more than you should, which means you get a choice. My chest tightened. A choice. Right. That's what every horror story whispers before it ends, that you had a choice and you still picked wrong.
If you're still here, still listening, it means I've managed to get this out. I don't know how much time I have before the feed loops again, before my voice becomes just another whisper stitched into the static. But if this reaches you, then hear me. Don't take the job. Don't even look for it. Pretend you never heard me. I thought it was just work, easy money, easy hours, a place where nothing really happened. But this place doesn't hire guards. It consumes them. Every night you spend here, the line between yourself and the walls, the cameras, the endless silence, it dissolves. You don't just guard the building, you become part of it. The ones before me tried to warn people too. I've seen their traces in the basement, their ID badges, their tapes, their blood. Every desperate warning ended up here, echoing back through the system until it was impossible to tell whose story belonged to who. That's the final trick. We're all the same voice in the end. I keep thinking about the first ad, the way it looks so harmless, sitting between postings for dog walkers and overnight cashiers. Just 6 words. Easy night work, high pay. That's it. That's the hook. But if you check tonight, wherever you are, I promise you'll see it again. The ad resets, the city changes, the names rotate, but it's always there, waiting for someone desperate enough, lonely enough, stupid enough to say yes, like I did. Maybe you're shaking your head right now, swearing you'd never fall for something that obvious. But desperation is louder than logic, and when your rent's overdue, or your stomach's empty, or the world feels like it's closing in, 6 words can look like salvation. Don't let them be. Because if you see the ad tomorrow, it means they need a new guard. And this time, the posting might be waiting for you.